Hey guys, Zack here at etrailer.com, and today we're going to be taking a look at the CURT 4-bike platform style bike rack. Now this is a 4-bike fat bike style bike rack, but it also can carry more traditional style road bikes like we have here and regular mountain bikes because it comes with the cradles that are appropriate for those tires too. So this is a really versatile rack. I can get 4 fat bikes if I want to, but if our friends or our family have different style bikes, we can just take whatever. And it's going to be really good at carrying lots of bikes. Now it has a 45-pound per bike capacity, so we can't really get some of the heavier e-bikes out there, but other than that it's going to do a good job of carrying most larger size bikes. Now this is a frame mount style bike rack, and what that means is it has hooks and it grabs onto the frame. So not ideal for carbon bikes, but if you're looking at something like this, you're getting fat bikes, probably larger size bikes that typically don't have those carbon frames. Now one thing with this style bike rack when it grabs the top tube like that is it can have issues with different size bikes. So I had issues trying to get a kid's bike on here, a women's bike, and they just start getting in the way when we have these trays. You gotta move those around, and it took me a while just to get these 4 bikes in the right configuration. Now if you're taking the same bikes out all the time, you know, you get them set in that same spot, you're going to be okay every time you load all those bikes up. But if you're taking your family one weekend, your friends another weekend, you're going to have to reconfigure those so they're not making contact and so they fit proper. And one thing with these hooks is you have to keep in mind that those top tubes have different heights. So we really got to work those to make sure that they line up properly where we can get those tightened down the right way. To get our bikes loaded up, the one that's the most challenging is the closest, and especially with the fat bike. So what you want to do is you want to make sure you have your arms up all the way. And you can do this a couple ways. Earlier when I was just kind of playing around with it, I put the arm down and then tried to put it in, but then it's kind of awkward trying to get the arm back up and clipped in. So that's probably not the best way to do it. But I'm just going to grab my bike, and that's what I like about this space back here behind this. I can just slide it underneath, and then we can adjust our cradles, but I'm going to push my hook down first to just kind of guide it in place. So I'm going to just kind of loosely have it in there so it doesn't fall against the vehicle while I adjust this cradle. So I'm going to get this cradle out a little bit further, loosen that one up, and then I'm going to lift up on my bike a little bit to take some of the pressure off there and get that cradle to line up where I need it to go. And then we can tighten those back down, lift it back up to get that pedal off there too. Make sure that one's tight in place. Get that ratcheted down more. And then we can start loading up our other bikes. Now, I'm just going to have some mountain bikes and some road bikes and a kid's bike on here today. I think that with the second fat bike, if you were doing that, I would definitely put that arm down so it's a little bit easier to get that, because feeding it through this way would be challenging, but you know, with the frame style hooks, that's kind of one of the challenges. So then this way we could just lift it in place, slide that hook down. You can easily adjust these wheel cradles to accommodate different wheelbases by just turning that knob and sliding those on there and then tightening that back down. The widest wheelbase I was able to accommodate was 65 inches center to center. I don't think we're really going to be carrying bikes like that, but if you needed to, it could. I think you're going to create a disadvantage for your other bike just because these do work together when you're trying to make those adjustments, and you would have to kind of move these around, and that set screw on the bottom there, you'd have to remove that every time you need to make those adjustments. So that's just something to keep in mind. These do get pretty wide. You can bring them in pretty close, but you got to be mindful of the other bike that you're putting on that platform as well. Now, when we have all these bikes loaded up and we forgot something in the hatch, we still have the ability to get in there. So you're definitely going to want to grab your buddy, whoever you're riding with that day, to help you out with this, because it's a heavy load and you're going to have to pull some pins and clips. So I'm going to bring in Joe to help me out here. He's going to lift up just slightly on the back, and I'm going to come in here and pull this pin and clip off the center section right here. Lift up just a little bit for me, Joe. There we go. Take some of that pressure off, pull that down, and then I have another little smaller pin and clip that I'm also going to pull, and then he can slowly lower that down so we can gain access to the hatch. Got it? So you can see that lowers quite a bit. This is a lot of weight extending out back here. And then we can get into our hatch right here. Now, as you can see, we're really close to the ground. Joe had to get pretty low to lower this down. The Grand Cherokee has a fairly high hitch, and we're still sitting this close to the ground. So if you had something that was sitting a little bit lower, like a minivan or maybe a smaller SUV, you would probably make contact with this. And that's due to how much that lowers down there. So it's something to be mindful of. It's not the end of the world if it touches. It's certainly not ideal, but you're not driving around like this. You're getting into the hatch real quick, and you're going to get it back up in place. But if that worries you, that's definitely something to keep in mind. This gives us good access. I think if you had like a minivan, you'd probably have some issues just because those have such long hatches, but most SUVs, you should be just fine. And then getting that back into place is going to be the same thing. You're definitely going to need somebody to help you out there because it's just too much to try to do the pins and clips and also get that lifted in place. So I'm going to have him lift that back up for me. And then I'm going to start with this lower one just to be a safety and get that put back in place. Get the clip put in place as a safety mechanism there. And then I'll get this larger one put in place. And this is where I think this is really kind of an issue. You can lower it down just a little bit for me, Joe. It's hard to kind of get that lined up. And sometimes you kind of got to lift on one side to feed that through. It's just a little bit of an inconvenience. So we can get that back in place. But if you've got this many bikes loaded up, you have somebody that can help you out. So slight inconvenience. There's some easier options out there, but this is still doable. You can still get into the back hatch. Now, when it comes to how versatile this bike rack is, I think one of the coolest things is we're not always going to need to carry 4 bikes. You know, let's say we're using it to take friends or we're going on family trips. That's when the 4 bike really shines. But if you're just taking yourself or maybe one other friend out during the week, we can take this down to a 2 bike because this is such a large bike rack as a 4. It's just kind of inconvenient to use if you're only using it for 1 or 2 bikes when we're not going on those trips. So we take the nuts off those bolts right there, just slide those out, and then this whole back half slides out. So we can store that up in the garage, and then it comes with a couple pieces here to put in to cap off those holes. We can get all of these little caps put in place of all of our hardware. Put our end cap in this end. And then we've finished it off, and we've got ourselves a nice little 2 bike rack whenever we're not needing the additional 2 spots. So it gives us all the same features as that 4 bike. We can have 2 fat bikes, we can have 1 of each, we can have 2 regular style bikes, whatever you want. That's what is really nice about this. It's a pretty versatile bike rack. Bringing it down like this during the week would be a really nice feature. And then you just save a ton of space on the back end of your vehicle. So a couple things when it comes to the different bikes you can put on here is how low these can ratchet down. And that's something to keep in mind. Something that I had an issue with was when I would have an adult's bike on one side and a kid's bike on the other, I couldn't get this hook low enough to attach to the top tube of a kid's bike, even when I was trying to use an adapter bar, because this would have to be high enough. You couldn't get this one low. So this is where the adult bike would be. We'd push that down, and that's as low as this back one would go. Now you would think you could just flip those around, but then it becomes a challenge for getting this bike loaded up because this one is on the top, and you have to get that one down, and then you couldn't get that one down that far either. So, or you couldn't get it up high enough, excuse me. So it just kind of creates an issue. That's my biggest flaw with this style when it comes to the frame mount. I would probably opt for something like the Ceres. With that Ceres one, what you can do is it just grabs onto the bike a different way versus the top style hook that comes down. Also, there are wheel-mounted styles. Yakima has a good one, so does Thule. And those grab by the wheel instead of having something come down on the frame. So they work with fat bikes, but they even work with carbon bikes, which is ideal. But those are a little bit more high-end. If you're looking for something that's more economical, I would definitely stick with the CURT or that Ceres option. Now when it comes to the cradles, the difference in these cradles is going to be 3 inches for the regular cradle that comes with the bike rack and 5 inches for the fat bike. Now when it comes to the overall length on the interior, the regular cradle will be 16 inches and the fat bike cradle will be 17 inches. Now when it comes to putting your bikes into the proper cradles, this mountain bike would fit in that fat bike cradle, but it's not ideal. It would be too much room in there and it would start moving around, and that's not ideal because then it would start sliding around within that hook and you just don't have a bike that's secured properly, especially since we don't have any straps that go with our cradles. That's another drawback to this. It's just a nice additional feature to make sure that your bike is sitting in place a little bit better. Now when it comes to these hooks, they have a really nice rubber coating on them. It's almost like a foam pad on the inside of that though. And they do a good job, as you can see here, grabbing onto our bike, protecting the finish there. You know, you're spending a lot of money on these bikes. You don't want them to get scuffed up or scratched. And then you just press those buttons to release the hook. Bring that up. Get that put down in place. And then I like that they have these locks that are included. You can see it comes with a set of keys. Now I found that some locks were a little bit easier to use on this. That one worked out well, but some of the others are a little tight. I struggled with a couple of them, so it's nice that they're included, but I don't think it's the nicest lock set in the world. But I also don't have to run a big cable lock all the way through all my bikes and attaching it somewhere, so it's a little bit more convenient, even though a couple of them I struggled with. I went ahead and took all the bikes off so we could take a closer look at how this works with a vehicle, some of the dimensions and the construction of it. So this is going to be just about all metal. There's some plastic here in the handles where we squeeze those and the housing for that, the foam pads that we talked about around the hooks, and then these knobs to adjust the wheel cradles are plastic as well. Everything else is going to be metal, has a really nice black powder coat finish on it, so I think it's going to do a good job of holding up against, you know, if you brush something up there in the garage or your bike hits it, you know, you're not going to scratch it too bad. It's going to hold up against rust and corrosion pretty good, I think. So now I'm going to give you from the center of our hitch pin hole to the closest point, and that's going to be right down here, and that is at 6.5 inches. But I think even if you got underneath there a couple more inches, you'd still be sitting okay. Now from the center of our hitch pin hole to the furthest out point, which is right out here at this cradle, is at about 54.5 inches from the center of our hitch pin hole. So that's something to consider on how much this is going to add to the back of our vehicle, which is nice because we can fold this up and get in better configuration, because this is not ideal whenever we're going to be at the trailhead to have this sticking out of our parking spot, or if we want to keep this in the garage. We can do some different setups for that. So let's just show you how those work out. So I went ahead and put some of my cradles up in the suitcase position. So what we do here is we pull these pins and clips down here, and here's a good example of that pane there. Those are so tight there that you would think that would be great for keeping them from rattling around, but it's just an inconvenience when we're trying to move these. Get those lined up and put those in place. So this is like a suitcase position. I don't think this is maybe the best way to store it on your vehicle, but I like doing this whenever I'm storing it in the garage, or if I need to move it, it's a little bit easier to hold on to and kind of keep it tucked up against the wall. So I'm going to take all these back down. I'm going to show you a little bit different position that I think is more appropriate for keeping on the vehicle. The next one is to take these center mass down. So we're going to pull those clips out. Struggle with those again. Put those down. Now, I'm kind of harping on these pins and clips. You're not going to be doing this a lot, but it's just one of those things where it's just not as easy as some of those other ones. But it is still a good functioning bike rack. It's going to carry your bikes just fine. It's just some minor inconveniences. So we'll get these tilted down and put in this position here. So this is one way that you can leave this on when we get to those setups. Now we're going to come to those same clips, or pin and clip, excuse me, that we did to tilt the bike away, But instead of tilting it down and pulling that second one, I'm going to get that lifted up. I'm going to bring this up in this position, and luckily it catches right there because we wouldn't want it smacking our glass. Now it does get a little bit close, so when it comes to that configuration of having the hitch underneath the bumper a little bit, this may have some issues. So we'll give you that measurement in just a second. But we'll get this pin and clip put in this position right here. Get that lined up. That went a little bit smoother than the other one. That's just because we have less weight on it there. So we can get these down. Not sticking up as much, but this is still sticking up. This is going to rattle a bunch in this position. But this is a much more appropriate way of keeping it on your vehicle when you're not using it. So I don't think that this is something I'd want to drive around town throughout the week when we're not using our bikes. But you know, if we're at a campsite and we want to run into town to get something, this is a good way, or just keep it tidied up in the parking lot. This is a good way of doing it. But you're still going to get all that movement going down the road with all that other stuff there. And then this furthest point out here is at about 19.5 inches. So we're not adding a ton to the back of the vehicle, and most of that is due to that shank being so long. And I think that this is going to work out with most vehicles, even with this sitting a little bit closer, but it's definitely something to be mindful of. Now, down at the hitch, this only works with 2-inch hitches, so it's not going to work with 1 1/4, and it does have an included anti-rattle bolt and clip to go with it. That's a really nice feature because having just a regular pin and clip with this much weight back here is going to be extremely noisy, so this is definitely going to cut down on that, take out a lot of that shake and play. Now with this much weight on the back of the vehicle though, you hit a big bump, you're going to get a little bit of up and down movement. That is very normal with this style of anti-rattle bolt. They do make some anti-rattle devices that go around the shank and then attaches to the collar of the hitch, and that takes a lot of the up and down movement out. But I don't think it's going to be a significant amount. You can take a look at the test course as we're going through some of those bumps. We're not getting a ton of movement, and that's kind of hitting those at a decent speed, and you're not going to be hitting that style bumps on a normal road either. Now this one doesn't have a lockdown at the anti-rattle bolt, where the Ceres one we've referred to a few times does, but the trade-off there is the Ceres Freedom doesn't have locks for the bikes. But at the end of the day, if you're looking for a bike rack to just get your bikes to the trail, this is going to do a really good job of that. I was actually surprised at how well it carried my bikes when I was out on the test course. I think that it's missing a few convenience features comparing it to the wheel-mounted style or the Ceres one. I did find it to be a disadvantage whenever I was trying to get women's and kids' bikes on here. I had some issues getting them all to line up properly. But I like the capacity, I like the versatility. I like that if I'm not carrying 4 bikes all the time, I can take it down to a 2 bike whenever I want and pretty quickly add on the 2 additional bikes at the end. So overall, it's going to be a solid bike rack if you're looking for something to carry 4 fat bikes or just a variation of bikes. But that's going to do it for our look at the CURT platform style 4-bike fat bike bike rack.